Darkness falls inside the GM Studios halls. Tabletop games where nightmares creep, in a realm where sanity is lost and weak. Welcome to the abyss, where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
For those of you that enjoy that smooth crooner sound, I am in the spirit. It is 4 o'clock here on the West Coast, and I am on whiskey for this episode of Inside the GM's Studio Side Quest, where we field questions from the internet. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
And I just realized I left my die over on the thing. I'm going to roll the die, but I don't have it, so I got to get it. Hang on.
Oh, hurry up. So, kind of, what's up, guys? How are you doing? We're waiting for it. Okay.
Fucking amateur hour over here. All right, I'm gonna roll the die. Matt's gonna give me a question. We're gonna fire from the hip. I get a 6. That's when the line is on the bottom. It's a 6. Whatever the line is on the bottom, it's a 6. And if it's on the other end, then it's a 9.
Filling his whiskey glass and getting his die to do the fucking job.
Well, you know, I gotta. Like I said, I already had a couple sips here. I was absent-minded.
All right, this one comes from Sufficient Court 2673 on our Ask Game Masters with the title, "Is this a good idea?" I love it when it starts off with that.
Yep.
Making players spectate a scripted fight. Oh boy. I have this concept that I don't know how to implement well, and should it be implemented at all? Hold on. I gotta open up. Okay. There is an arena of magical insects. It is located in a terrarium of normal size, and people gather around to bet and watch how magical infused insects fight. The insects are of normal size. I'm guessing normal insect size. Main idea is that I describe the fighters to the players. They make bets, and then I start an actual combat and fight by a certain script, but of course that is also influenced by rolls made. Is this a bad idea? What could make it better? Or what should I do generally? Please help. All right. First of all, I'll tell you right now, don't do a fight that you're rolling for, that you're planning on doing almost like a full combat fight, and just rolling some dice in front of the players, because that can get really boring really quick.
Yeah, I'm kind of inclined to agree with you. It sounds as though the reason that he wants to do that is because he wants there to be some, like if the players are betting or guessing or whatever, that it's not like already determined. And so that's, you know, if it's already determined, then they're going to be like, well, what the hell? Like you already knew whether it was going to be right or wrong. I'm a little unclear. So it's like, it takes place in a normal size terrarium.
Yeah, the writer kept saying they're normal size.
And it's normal. So the players are just like looking over a terrarium with like insects, regular sized insects, and they're fighting. I guess the question that I would have for him is like, why does he think this is dramatic? And why is it important? I'm not saying that there can't be such a scenario where the players are just viewing something happen that can be dramatic. But I'm with you. If you're going to give them some description of something dramatic happening, don't have it be contingent on a series of like dice rolls, because the way to keep that interesting is to keep it cinematic and rife with description and drama, and using the mechanics for that is going to bog that down. The only reason players like mechanics and rules is because they're in the narrative, and there's a way to adjudicate randomness that may or may not happen. But you got to get them invested in what's happening here with these insects fighting. And he didn't really contextualize why that's important for the plot or why the players ought to care. Players generally don't like things that they don't have any agency over. They don't like things that go on for too long where they're not involved. They might appreciate decent flavor text if it helps them navigate an environment, for instance. It helps them understand or it gives some sort of flavor, especially if it sets the mood. But the reason that those things are important is because their characters are moving in the sandbox of the world and they want to have the available information. Try giving your players 10 pages of flavor text and they'll very quickly get bored with your game. They're like, okay, so I walked down a hall and now I have to sit here for 5 minutes and listen to description. And then I walked over and I opened a door and then now I have to listen to like 5 more minutes of description. And then, it's like, geez, I want to get on with the action. I want to be moving through the narrative in a way that allows me to control my character. And anytime a character is a spectator for something, that typically isn't occurring. And so you need to, I guess I'll just start off by asking you, Matt, for things that are spectator driven, because there's nothing wrong with the players viewing something on the
No,
face
not
of
at
it,
all.
right? Not anything wrong with that. What are some tactics that you use to keep something that might be a little longer than just a paragraph of descriptor text uh, exciting and keep the player's attention? Like, do you have some tactics that you use? I hardly ever do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, because I'm a fan of the oh god, what do they call it? There's a name for it now. It's not the death die, but it's something. It's D6, and odds is yes, evens are no.
okay.
Which I'm gonna go with the same thing that this questioner is posting here. If it was me running this, what I would do is I would have 2d6 for each of the insects. They each get one. The blue one will be for the beetle. The other one here will be for the mantis. And it would start off, the start of the fight, I'd roll and I would give a quick description of who was, making more headway than the other. Then I'd
Hmm.
roll it again. Tell if there was a change. Say the mantis, started beating the beetle this time. The beetle at first got really good. I would say, then I would try to help, bring up the spirits of the players that maybe betted on the beetle or the mantis instead. Say in a turn of events, blah blah blah. The mantis has taken control. In I'd roll one more time for best of three to see who won the fight. So it would be quick and easy. But I'm not doing like a regular combat encounter where I'm rolling an attack roll and a damage roll every single time for each one.
I get what you're saying. So that's probably really good advice, which is to have something, if you want to have a die roll, try to keep the dice rolls is as simple as possible so
Mm-hmm.
that you're not doing layers like attack roll, saving throw, damage, whatever. And then for each round, you just have it be some sort of best of, or maybe you could even have it like envisioning it like it starts off at the neutral position, right? So it's neutral. They're neck and neck. And every time a die roll comes up toward beetle victory or mantis victory, it goes a click this direction. So
Yep.
you have maybe 3 clicks where it's like neutral and then advantage mantis. Mantis dominates. Mantis wins. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe he goes from advantage, he gets one win and he goes advantage mantis. But then the next roll, the beetle gets it. So now it just goes back to neutral, right? And you can have a good back and forth like
Yeah.
that because it's just 2 steps, but like it would basically require them to win 2 or 3 subsequent rolls, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, rolls in succession. And if it doesn't, then it could be back and forth. It could be back to neutral and then advantage beetle, and then beetle dominates, and then now it's just advantage beetle, and then now it's back to neutral, and you could jockey it back and forth, and that would the odds. It would allow enough flexibility if you were just describing what happens in narrative terms. It would allow it would allow for even a pretty drawn out fight if they're fairly evenly matched, for
Oh, sure.
instance. Or it could be a very quick fight where it's just like one just fucking kicks the shit out of the other. It gets
Mm-hmm.
like 3 rolls in a row, boom, 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 he wins. But it could go back and forth, and you could keep the drama there. But I'm with you. Simple die roll with maybe there are modifiers you could apply, like this
Yeah,
the
maybe
beetle is
the
got
beetle gets a D6, but the mantis, because they're more of a killer insect, maybe they get a D8.
yeah.
so they
That
have a
would
better
be
chance of beating
probably
it.
be rather than applying modifiers, you're right. It probably would just be like, what's the strength of the creature? D4, D6, D8,
Yeah.
D10, maybe D12.
Mhm.
And then, whoever gets the higher number on any given roll is, gets 1 point, and the first to score 3 points in a Karate Kid tournament kind of way just wins. And so, but you should be um, describing things cinematically because one, that's going to be more interesting from a listening standpoint. When you're involved in something, it stays more dynamic, but when you're just listening to something, it doesn't need to it needs to be more evocative, right? Like a film is more of a passive medium than a video game. And so it's like you look at video games from like the early 80s, it's like, well, why were video games more popular than movies? Movies have more description. It's because they're just interactive. And so doing that is probably the key to keeping it fast paced, which is what you want. You want to try to get through things. If they're, you know, dramatic, then describe them in really dramatic terms. And because the dice aren't telling you precisely what happens, it's like, well, this guy got an advantage, but you can describe it in however you want because it's not on a big enough hierarchy where it's like a
Mhm.
critical hit or a critical fumble or max damage or whatever like that. It's just like, okay, it's just like, let's describe it in a way that keeps the flow of the combat encounter that
Mhm.
you're viewing um, much more dynamic. So that's pretty good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would add on to that would
So
be a
in the
different
past,
tactic.
I've always been against like NPC versus NPC battle, and that's it. PCs
Hmm.
are have nothing to do with it unless they are adding something like aiding in a way. But if they're just sitting back and watching a combat, I much prefer having it either pre-scripted or easy dice rolls. I know recently this was just like a couple
Hmm.
of years ago, if I remember correctly. That might have been while you were still living here in Ann Arbor, and we were playing. But I remember a fight happened between NPCs, and I think afterwards you told us that you were waiting for us to jump in, but you had pre-rolled everything. You had pre-scripted the entire fight, and there was I
Yeah.
think what made you say that you thought we were going to jump in is because at one point the guy that was on our side, our homeboy, lost. He lost horribly. And we were all just like, "Whoa, what the fuck?" And Dave just was just like, "Yeah, you know what? I rolled all this shit earlier, and it surprised the
Yeah.
shit out of me too."
It's,
So,
yeah, it's
but it made it so when the way that David described it during all this, made he because he had rolled it all before. I don't know if you took notes and all that, but you hit
mhm.
all the good points of it, and it was very cinematic and it was quick. You just described this fight happening, and we were all just so into it, we didn't jump in. And then when the whole thing turned around on us and our homeboy fell, we were just like, "Whoa, what the fuck? What happened?" And we were like, "Why?" And you were just like, "I didn't even mean for him to lose. I rolled all this shit, like yesterday, and this is
Yeah,
just
and
what
so,
happened."
but it's amazing, like when you go through all of the mechanics and the dice roll, and it's all just kind of handled on a narrative level, how quickly you can get through just describing what happens in a fight,
Yeah, exactly.
um, really quickly. And so I probably learned a lesson there, which is I thought that it's like you were like enjoying it, like you were watching a movie or
Yeah.
something, and you're like, oh, this
Oh,
is
totally.
interesting. And it was like, and I'm like, okay, they're gonna jump in now, right? And it was like,
hmm
nope. Like,
No, we
and
were
so,
just
but
waiting
this,
because we didn't know that you rolled everything. We thought this was just a narrative that you created, and we all thought, "Oh, he's a part of the party here. He's with the heroes. He's gonna win, of course." And then he lost, and we were like, "Wow, what the fuck?"
yeah, yeah, I just had scripted it out, and I was like, okay, I don't want to get bogged down into this because in the game, because there are several junctures that the PCs could intercede, and um, so that might be a route to go, which is just have the dice rolls all scripted, like
hmm
just if you want them to be random, hash them out ahead of time and just go, well, then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then
Yeah.
this happens, and then that happens. Um, but for something that the PCs are spectators on, it's not really as important to have he has this many hit points left and he uses this spell
Right.
slot, or I mean, they're critters, so they probably don't have spell slots, but
Hmm.
he uses his poison spray thing or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, well, just describe it in terms that are interesting, but I would challenge the questioner to think hard about what this is adding to the narrative. It seems almost like he's just kind of in love with the idea of this thing, and it
Hmm.
almost seems kind of antithetical to the spirit of a interactive role-playing game. So not that it couldn't work, it just you need to figure out a way to tie it into the players being involved. So that might be a little bit better of a tactic to figure out why the players are invested. Can they influence the outcome in any way? Then that might be a little more interesting. Otherwise,
Mm.
it probably will just get stagnant, even if you're great at writing really punchy, dynamic copy, or words, whatever. It's not likely to hit as well. Players don't have a lot of patience, at least in my experience, for things
Hmm.
that they feel like they're passive observers. And even if those things are interesting, you need to use stuff like that super sparingly, or the players will feel like they can't affect the plot, and that's not good.
Yeah, when I was reading this, the first thing that came to mind, it made me think of the GM having a conversation with himself. And
Hmm.
I don't like doing that myself. Sometimes it happens, but I try to keep it as short as possible, because as I hear myself talking to myself as two different characters, even trying to make it as entertaining as possible, I still just feel when I'm doing, I'm just like, this is boring. These guys don't
It's
want to sit
yeah,
here and listen to me talk to myself, as these
and
characters. So I always try to push them into, come on, guys, get in here and be a part of the conversation,
it's
or I try to make it as quick as possible.
because it's difficult to kind of go like, okay, what are the motivations? Like, it's one thing to focus on the motivations and the personality of one character at a time, but when you're trying to like code switch between them, it's not super easy to do. And this is the reason that one, I'm not a big fan of having to run NPCs that are in the party.
Hmm.
And especially because if I do that, I find myself making those NPCs fade into the background a little more. They're never going to be a bard or a paladin or a sorcerer, somebody with high charisma
Yeah.
that's outspoken and assertive and has lots of things to say and lots of opinions and can basically dictate what the group is doing, because that robs the players of the agency, of the ability to interact with other NPCs. So I try not to have that be the case. It's made easier if you like with Krapos' character. I took over a character for an NPC for a PC who is already kind of in the background. And so it remains consistent with his character that he's not particularly, talkative, or is the person that's making the decisions, or he's not a high charisma character. And
Hmm.
so I'm still on the fence about whether I want to keep him in the party, but it works for that purpose.
Hmm.
But you introduce an NPC that is like a sorcerer, like 18 charisma or whatever, and it's like, and then suddenly he's just really quiet during the
Hmm.
times when he would be the most beneficial to assert himself. That seems odd. And so there's similar things going on in combat, which is, undercutting the player's autonomy, their ability to interact with their environment. Passively spectating is hardly ever fun in a game, unless it serves some strong purpose in the plot. The PCs have something really riding on it, right? If one of their NPC allies gets captured and is in some sort of coliseum, and they're waiting with bated breath to see whether he or she will make it out so that they can rescue them or something, then that might be appropriate. But you're just talking about like they're betting on some insects fighting. This seems pretty
Hmm.
low stakes. It doesn't seem like it's affecting the plot. It doesn't seem like the players are super invested in it. Even if they're dumping a ton of money into it, you have to
Yeah.
ask yourself, why does the story necessitate them dumping a bunch of money into this? Seems like an auxiliary thing that probably could be cut from your plot, but
Hmm.
if you're set on doing it, I believe we've given you some tools that would make it a little less cringe or a little less stagnant and
Yeah.
stale.
Yeah, if one last thing to, if you want to have betting in your game that is more like games of chance, like say like roulette or something like that, instead of poker, where poker you can really, hell, you can actually use dice to make a poker hand and find out who's going to win.
Hmm.
But if you want something that's more like craps or roulette, um, think of the odds of the game. How many people are there? Just come up with a number, and break it down to they have a 30% chance to win. Just go ahead and roll
Hmm.
a percentile. You roll under 30, then they might hit on something. I think what we're trying to say is if you're going to have dice rolls in it, make them quick so that the
Yeah.
narrative continues on and stays exciting.
Yeah, there probably does need to be some layers of sophistication if the plot hinges on something, right?
Right.
So, for instance, there are rules to Three Dragon Ante. Matt
Hmm.
and I have both played it. It's a fantastically good game.
Hmm.
And if your players are playing it in the narrative of the game, you could conceivably just play the game, but that's too time consuming.
Yep.
But it's also probably not super satisfying for a game that is, usually takes somewhere between 30 and 90 minutes to play in real time, is probably not super satisfying to just say, okay, roll your proficiency with Three Dragon Ante. Oh, you got the higher thing, you win the game.
Yeah.
Like that's so there needs to be a gradient in there, but only if it's relevant. Like if your players are just putzing around killing time at the tavern or whatever, and they just want to earn a couple of extra coins, then that one roll is probably fine.
Hmm.
But if it's like, you know, uh, some mysterious ghostly figure is guarding the entrance to a dungeon,
Yeah.
and one of the PCs needs to play him in dragon chess in order to
Yeah.
get
I was going to
by,
say playing
one
chess
roll is
with
not going
death.
to do it.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
you,
or
you meet
something.
death and you have to play chess. Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
good
and
one.
so that's, probably ought to be a little more dramatic than that. So there a series of roles where characters get advantages or disadvantages are good, but not probably the layer beneath that, which is rolling damage and saving throws and quantifying things in concrete numbers. What's important is kind of keeping tally of like who has how many points, so to speak.
Hmm.
If you're on that layer, you're probably fairly safe. You can make it quick and dynamic with still introducing an element of chance, and have enough layers of sophistication to feel like it's a tug of war between two opponents, as opposed to just one comes in and gets one roll and kills the other one. That's boring. So striking that balance is pretty key, I think.
Yeah. Very much so. I think that's it for me. You got anything to end on with there, David?
I think the premise was a little flawed there, and I probably would err on the side of telling him like, and probably don't do that,
Yeah.
unless you can come up with a good reason. But
That's
if
why
you're
I went to let back and at the very beginning of the question, is this a good idea?
probably
Yeah.
not,
Nah.
but
Yeah.
if you're going to do it, then try to think through some, maybe bolster some sort of the necessity for it, and then design it in a way that makes it feel fluid, fast-paced, dynamic, with still some layers of sophistication
Mm.
that the players are anticipating, for some sort of purpose to them. If you're doing that, I think it can work. It can work for, a kind of neat encounter. But if you're just in love with the idea of having this play out, to me, when I just picture a bunch of players standing around a terrarium looking down at insects, it seems like a really boring scene to me.
Yeah. It adds to the point where this whole thing is players don't want to be pushed to the back of the room. They want to be a part
Yeah.
of the action. And this sounds more like pushing them to the back of the room and watching bugs fight.
It'd probably be more interesting if you could some way give them a potion to shrink them down to get into the terrarium with the bugs,
Yeah.
and, in a cinematic skill challenge kind of way, have them, riding the bugs and fighting them, commanding them,
Mm.
ushering them. That would be more interesting. But that's not what he asked. So,
Yeah. Get their hands on a true polymorph potion and they become the
yeah,
bugs. Ooh.
yeah. There you go. There's much much more interesting options than
Yeah.
just because something is not something that you've ever seen or heard of before. It turns out that tropes are tropes for a reason, and it's because they typically work.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Should we just leave it on a good night?
And good luck.
Wunderbar.
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 I don't know what that means, but okay.